She went to the W.I. Hall expecting petty gossip, not to discover a secret blackmail list with her own name on it. This is Agatha Raisin and Mrs. Boggle's blackmail list. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. Agatha Raisin should have known the evening would go wrong the moment she saw the banner. Castley Women's Institute Annual Skills Showcase, it declared in chirpy lettering, clearly designed by someone with too much time and too many felt-tip pens. Agatha stopped in the doorway of the W.I. Hall, lips tightening. She had only agreed to attend because Mrs. Blocksby had promised that there would be no baking, crafting, or public humiliation. Naturally, all three greeted her at once. The hall buzzed with villagers keen to show off talents that ranged from mildly competent to deeply regrettable. Doris Simpson was wrestling with a tablecloth. A collection of knitted vegetables lay abandoned beside the tea urn, and at the far end, Mrs. Boggle, Castley's chief rumour-monger and unpaid menace, stood with the triumphant air of a woman who has already ruined someone's day and is searching for her next victim. Agatha braced herself and stepped in, wearing the teal dress she had chosen for its flattering cut. It had looked lovely in her bedroom mirror. Under the harsh W.I. fluorescent lighting, however, it transformed into a bilious shade best described as lettuce left in the sun. She caught a glimpse of herself in a window and nearly turned around. Too late. Mrs. Boggle had spotted her. "Ah, Agatha Raisin, just in time," Mrs. Boggle trilled, clapping her hands like a malevolent seal. "Our glamorous visitor from London will be giving a demonstration of urban beauty techniques. Do gather round." Several villagers turned, delighted at the prospect of fresh entertainment at Agatha's expense. Agatha forced a smile that could have cut glass. "I'm doing what?" she snapped. "Oh, don't be modest," Mrs. Boggle cooed, steering her toward a small table near the front. "Show the poor dears how you maintain your sparkle." Agatha looked at the table and felt her soul attempt to leave her body. It held exactly 2 items, a cracked hand mirror and a small jar of glitter gel Roy Silver had once gifted her as a joke she now regretted keeping in the cottage where Mrs. Blocksby might have glimpsed it. Agatha stared at the sad arrangement. "You cannot be serious," Mrs. Boggle beamed. "We're all very eager, dear." The crowd murmured encouragement. The worst offenders leaned forward as though expecting Agatha to transform them into starlets by sheer force of will. A few even pushed to the front, eager for a better view of the impending disaster. Agatha cleared her throat. "Ladies, I am not." But Mrs. Boggle, in her glory, clapped her hands again. "A demonstration! How marvellous!" Agatha picked up the jar. The glitter inside looked as though it had been scraped off a nightclub floor in 1987. She shot a pleading look at Mrs. Blocksby, who returned a sympathetic wince. The humiliation was complete when Doris Simpson whispered loudly to her neighbour, "I do hope she shows us how she covers the wrinkles." Agatha snapped the lid back on the jar. "No demonstration," she announced. "If anyone wants glamour, they can buy a magazine." The hall erupted into disappointed muttering, and then Mrs. Boggle, overreaching in her theatrical annoyance, dropped her handbag. The contents exploded across the wooden floor like a guilty conscience. Lipstick tubes rolled away. Tissues fluttered. But what caught Agatha's eye were the neat stacks of typed pages that slid out and scattered across the boards. Agatha bent to gather them, more out of reflex than kindness. Her hand froze when she saw her own name near the top of a page, next to a typewritten phrase, "Favour owed, humiliation required." She blinked. No, she had read it correctly. Another sheet listed villagers beside ominous notes. "Debt outstanding." He won't keep quiet. Payment due. She stared, pulse quickening. This was no list for W.I. activities. It looked like a ledger, possibly even blackmail material. Before she could read more, Mrs. Boggle lunged forward with surprising speed, snatching the papers. "Private," she snapped, stuffing them into her handbag in frantic handfuls. Several villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Charles Fraith, lounging near the back with his usual expression of amused indifference, straightened slightly. "Interesting filing system," he murmured. "Drop it," Mrs. Boggle hissed at Agatha, cheeks blotched with fury. "You London types never respect boundaries." Agatha crossed her arms. "If you're keeping files on people, I'd say boundaries are already an issue." Mrs. Boggle ignored her and stomped to the front of the hall, but the atmosphere had changed. Villagers whispered. Someone coughed pointedly. Even the tea urn burbled with disapproval. Agatha's humiliation now shared space with something sharper: curiosity. What on earth was Mrs. Boggle compiling? Charles drifted to her side. "You do bring drama to the dullest evenings, Aggie." She glared. "Oh, do shut up." "I try," Charles said, smiling, "but the WI never cooperates." Agatha had endured enough. She marched out into the evening air, stepping away from the hall's clatter. Only then did she pull out a cigarette, shielding it like a guilty secret. She inhaled once, sharply, letting the irritation bleed out. But the image of those pages gnawed at her. Why was her name listed? And what did Mrs. Boggle intend by humiliation required? Agatha, who had suffered more than enough of that for one lifetime, felt indignation surge again. She flicked ash into the gravel. "If that woman is blackmailing half the village," she muttered, "I'll expose her myself." A voice called from behind. "Agatha!" Mrs. Bloxby hurried toward her, face creased with worry. "Agatha, Mrs. Boggle has disappeared." Agatha blinked. Disappeared? She left the hall. No one saw where she went. Agatha ground out her cigarette. "Well," she said, "isn't that interesting?" Agatha stormed into her cottage with the force of a woman personally wronged by an entire village. Hodge, curled on the windowsill, lifted his head with the slow disdain only a well-fed cat could manage. He blinked once, as if assessing the likelihood of a second dinner, then flattened his ears when he saw her expression. "Oh, don't start," Agatha snapped, tossing her handbag onto the chair. "You had supper an hour ago, and frankly, I'm the one who deserves pity." Hodge yawned, unimpressed. Agatha paced the sitting room, the events of the WI hall swirling in maddening loops. That awful lighting, that ridiculous glitter gel, and worst of all, Mrs. Boggle's theatrical snatching of those typed papers. Every humiliating detail simmered in her chest like a poorly concealed kettle. "I have half a mind to march back and drag the rest of that list out of her," she muttered, lighting a cigarette with a sharp flick. She inhaled, then caught herself. "No, you're right, Hodge. That woman would probably accuse me of theft, or witchcraft." The knock on the door startled them both. Hodge leapt down with a thump, ears pricked in suspicion. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, straightened her dress, and opened the door to find Bill Wong standing on the step, looking mildly harassed. "Evening, Agatha," Bill said. "Sorry to barge in. There's been a bit of a situation at the WI hall." "Let me guess," Agatha replied. "Mrs. Boggle has been elected Queen of Smug." Bill sighed. "She's disappeared." Agatha blinked. "Good." "Agatha." "Well, good for my sanity," she amended. "What's this nonsense about disappearing?" Bill stepped inside, rubbing the back of his neck. "Several WI members called us. Said she left the hall abruptly and hasn't been seen since. They're worried." "Worried?" Agatha scoffed. If Mrs. Boggle vanished for a decade, the only worry would be who gets her seat at the next meeting. Bill gave her a flat look. "Agatha." Fine, she huffed. "But she left in a state, I'll tell you that." Dropped her handbag, flashed around some suspicious paperwork. Bill froze. "Paperwork?" Agatha waved a hand dismissively. "Probably more of her petty gossip. Lists of who owes her favours, who she's annoyed this week. Though one of the pages did have my name on it." Bill straightened. "Your name?" "Yes," Agatha said, suddenly irritated by his tone. "Don't look at me like that. She's probably writing the most scandalous WI minutes in Britain." "Or something else," Bill murmured. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" He shifted awkwardly. "Would you mind walking me back to the hall? I want to check the cloakroom." "Why?" "Because," Bill said patiently, "you're the last person who saw Mrs. Boggle's belongings intact." Agatha bristled. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," Bill replied, already heading for the door. "But if there's something odd going on, you saw it first." Agatha snatched her coat. "I'll have you know, Bill Wong, that I am an excellent witness." Hodge meowed loudly as though disputing this. "Stay," Agatha told him. "Guard the house, or nap, whatever." They walked through the darkening lane, the village unusually hushed. Lamps behind curtains cast soft rectangles of light onto the pavement. A few windows flickered with early evening telly. Agatha felt oddly exposed, as though half the cottages were eavesdropping. Bill unlocked the WI hall and flicked on the lights. The place looked exactly as it had before. Knitted vegetables, crochet projects, and the faint smell of disinfectant. But when they reached the cloakroom, Agatha stopped short. Mrs. Boggle's handbag lay on the floor, tipped over like a stunned beetle. Its contents were scattered across the linoleum. A compact, a faded purse, 3 crushed tissues, and Agatha's pulse jumped, a torn piece of paper she recognized immediately. Bill crouched and lifted it carefully. "This looks typed. Names. 3 of them." He squinted. "Final notice." He looked up sharply. "Agatha, what exactly did you see earlier?" She folded her arms. "I saw a busybody with delusions of importance, and now I see something that looks suspiciously like blackmail." Bill exhaled. "I was afraid of that." Before Agatha could question him further, the door creaked. Charles Fraith sauntered in, hands in his pockets, expression amused as usual. "Thought I'd find you two here," he drawled. "Villagers buzzing with talk." Agatha glared. "Don't tell me you've come to volunteer." "No," Charles said cheerfully. "I've come to offer information. I saw Mrs. Boggle heading toward the lane behind the vicarage earlier. Looked in quite a temper." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Did you follow her, or were you skulking about for unrelated reasons?" Charles smiled. "My reasons are always unrelated, Aggie." Bill asked, "Did she speak to anyone?" "No idea," Charles said lightly. "But she was gripping that handbag like it contained state secrets." Agatha sniffed. "Probably did." Charles tilted his head. "You sound unusually invested." Agatha bristled. "She had my name on a list, Charles, a typed list. And don't pretend you're innocent. She probably had dirt on you too." "True," Charles said, "but nothing I'd pay to conceal." Bill shot him a look. "You're sure she was alone?" "Quite sure," Charles replied. "Though," he added, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, "I might have missed something." Agatha rolled her eyes. "Meaning you're hiding something?" Charles's smile widened. "Meaning I'm bored. Don't make me regret helping." Mrs. Blocksby entered then, face lined with concern. "Oh dear," she said softly. "I hoped you'd found her by now." "We found her handbag," Bill said, "and a list." Mrs. Blocksby hesitated. "Agatha, I didn't want to worry you, but Mrs. Boggle has been collecting information on villagers for weeks. She was very secretive." Agatha leaned forward. "Collecting what sort of information?" Mrs. Blocksby lowered her voice. "Little things. Debts, favour owed, embarrassments. She said she was keeping track." Agatha shivered, though the hall was warm. Keeping track? She was preparing ammunition. Bill slipped the torn page into an evidence bag. "We need to treat this seriously." Agatha huffed. "She's probably hiding in her pantry, planning her next act of cruelty." Charles leaned against the wall. "If she is, she's doing it remarkably quietly." Agatha suddenly felt the exhaustion of the evening seep into her bones. "I'm going home, and if Mrs. Boggle turns up, tell her I'll give her a demonstration next time. How to mind her own business." Later that night, after a lukewarm cup of tea and a failed attempt to read a magazine, Agatha heard something slip through her letterbox. She froze. Hodge padded to the door, tail flicking. Agatha followed, nerves prickling. On the mat lay a single folded piece of paper. She opened it with a jerk. "You were on her list. Don't dig." Agatha stared at the words, her stomach tightening. Someone knew she'd seen the list. Someone wanted her silent. And now the evening's humiliation felt like the least of her worries. Hodge brushed against her leg, purring faintly in the quiet room. Agatha folded the note with crisp precision. "Oh, Hodge," she murmured, "I'm afraid this means trouble." The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, releasing a soft sigh. Carsley never did like secrets staying buried. Hodge woke Agatha by batting her hairbrush off the bedside table and directly into her face. The brush struck her nose with a thud that felt deeply personal. Agatha bolted upright, clutching the bridge of her nose and glaring at her cat, who sat primly on the duvet as if delivering a scheduled wake-up call. "Sabotage," she muttered. "Pure sabotage." Hodge blinked, unrepentant. Agatha swung her legs out of bed, grimly aware that today was already shaping up to be wretched. She had barely slept. The anonymous note, "You were on her list. Don't dig," had replayed in her mind like an irritating advert jingle. She had planned to march straight to Bill's office after breakfast and demand action, but she never reached breakfast. A shriek echoed up the lane. Not the dramatic, theatrical shriek of someone seeing a spider, but a proper village shriek, thin, panicked, and promising calamity. Agatha froze, one slipper on, one slipper lost behind the bed. Before she could locate it, another voice carried through the open window. "Mrs. Raisin? Mrs. Raisin, you'd best come quick." It was Doris Simpson, which rarely heralded anything good. Agatha grabbed her coat, shoved her feet into mismatched shoes, and stomped outside. Doris was already halfway up her garden path, breath wheezing like a malfunctioning kettle. "Doris," Agatha snapped, "if this is about your water pressure again—" "It ain't," Doris squeaked. "It's a body down by the brook, face down and all. I reckon you'll want to see." Agatha stared. "A body?" "Yes, and Bill Wong's on his way. Oh, it's awful, Mrs. Raisin, absolutely awful." For once, Doris was not exaggerating. Down the narrow footpath behind the cottages, villagers had gathered in an anxious huddle, their coats flapping, their faces drawn with a blend of fear and hungry curiosity. The brook, usually a harmless trickle, was churned into a muddy swirl from recent foot traffic. Bill Wong knelt beside the still form in the water. His expression told Agatha everything before she even saw the face. Mrs. Boggle, hair spread like wet seaweed, skirt tangled around one leg, her body half submerged in the shallow brook. The water barely came up to her knees, which made the sight feel wrong, pathetically wrong. Even in death, Mrs. Boggle looked irritated. Agatha approached slowly. She felt a strange discomfort. She had despised the woman, but murder in Carsley was never something to take lightly. Not that she wasn't slightly thrilled to be involved again, but the thrill was tempered by the starkness of the scene. Bill stood and blocked her path. "Agatha, don't touch anything." "I wasn't going to," she lied. He lowered his voice. "This is bad." "She's dead?" "Yes," Bill said tightly. "And there's bruising on the wrists. Fresh." Agatha's eyebrows rose. So she didn't just slip on her own malice. "Agatha," Bill warned, "do not start." But she already had. Her pulse quickened, the familiar thrill of deduction settling over her like a warm shawl. Murder in Carsley, again, and Mrs. Boggle, of all people. The village would explode with gossip by tea-time. Charles Fraith appeared behind her as if conjured by the mere possibility of entertainment. "Terrible business," he drawled. Agatha rounded on him. "Where did you spring from?" Charles gestured airily. "Walking my dog." "You don't have a dog." "I borrowed one," he corrected, as a startled-looking terrier sniffed at his shoe. "Seems quite friendly." The dog, visibly unimpressed, tried to wriggle away. Bill ignored them both. "We need everyone to step back, give space." Villagers shuffled reluctantly. Agatha didn't move. "What happened to her handbag?" she asked. Bill shook his head. "Not here, and if she fell accidentally, it should be nearby." "But it isn't," Agatha finished, "meaning someone took it." "That is not what I said." "It's what you meant." Bill glared. "Agatha!" But Agatha wasn't listening. Her eyes had caught something glinting near the hem of Mrs. Boggle's skirt. She crouched before Bill could stop her and gently lifted the edge of the fabric. A small metal key was tangled in the threads, unexpectedly bright against the murky water. Bill exhaled through his teeth. "Agatha!" "I didn't touch it," she said defensively. "Well, hardly. You're welcome." Bill pulled gloves from his pocket, retrieved the key and examined it. "Doesn't look like a house key." "Locker?" Agatha suggested. "Safe deposit, secret filing cabinet." Charles leaned in, annoyingly close. "Diaries of erotica?" Agatha shot him a murderous look. "Do grow up." Bill pocketed the key. "Please stand back. We'll handle this." Agatha folded her arms. "You'll handle it poorly if you ignore obvious clues." "I'm not ignoring anything," Bill said. "But this is a police matter." Agatha sniffed. "She was murdered, Bill. Look at her wrists." "I am looking," he said, strained, "and we need to wait for the coroner." "Murder," Agatha repeated, loudly enough that half the villagers turned. That set them off. "She must have slipped," someone said. No, she drank too much sherry," another offered. "She said her footpath was haunted," muttered a third. Charles murmured, "Haunted by creditors, perhaps." Bill held up a hand. "Enough. Everyone go home until we've secured the area." But villagers never went home when told. They lingered in tight knots, whispering feverishly as if the brook itself were listening. Agatha moved closer to Charles. "You didn't happen to see her last night, did you?" He hesitated just long enough. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Charles Fraith, you're hiding something." He smiled lazily. I hide all sorts of things. Keeps life interesting. That's not helpful. It's not meant to be. Agatha turned away, irritated and intrigued in equal measure. She scanned the brook, the path, the hedgerow. Someone had been here with Mrs. Boggle, someone strong enough to bruise her wrists, someone desperate or furious or both. Bill approached her again, softer now. Agatha, I know you'll get involved, you always do, but please, be careful. I'm always careful, she lied, and don't interfere. I never interfere, she added, with an even bigger lie. Bill sighed. We're classifying the death as suspicious. Agatha's heart leapt. Suspicious? Excellent. Not excellent, Bill said firmly. Serious. Agatha nodded solemnly. Then, under her breath, excellent. As Bill directed the constables, Agatha stepped back from the brook. Mrs. Boggle, who had spent a lifetime collecting the village's secrets, had taken her final secret to the water. But not all of it. Agatha glanced at Bill's pocket where the small metal key now rested. A key meant a lock, and a lock meant secrets. Agatha Raisin had no intention of waiting politely for the police to uncover them. Hodge greeted her at home by curling around her leg, purring with the smug satisfaction of a creature who expected breakfast delivered by footmen. Agatha bent to stroke him, her mind already racing. A key, Hodge, she murmured. A missing handbag, bruised wrists, and half the village lying through their teeth. Hodge blinked, profoundly uninterested. Agatha straightened, eyes sharp. Well, Bill may solve this in a decade, but I'll solve it by Friday. The kettle clicked behind her, letting out a soft, weary sigh, an oddly domestic blessing upon her declaration of war. Agatha's cottage had seen some questionable gatherings in its time, but never one quite like this. Hodge sat atop the boiler, surveying the room as if hosting the meeting himself. His tail flicked with regal disdain each time someone spoke out of turn, which meant constantly. Agatha planted her hands on her hips. All right, everyone. Listen. Mrs. Boggle didn't drown by accident. She was murdered, and she was blackmailing half the village. We are going to find out who killed her. Bill Wong, slumped in an armchair that seemed designed to swallow policemen whole, rubbed his forehead. Agatha, this is a police inquiry. You are not— Bill, Agatha interrupted. If you want to solve this case sometime before your retirement, you'll let me help. Before he could argue, the door burst open. Roy Silver swept in dramatically, scarf trailing behind him like a theatrical comet. Darlings, he cried, I came the moment I heard Carsley had descended into crime. You poor things. I brought nothing but moral support and a tin of caramel wafers. Agatha blinked. Roy, what are you doing here? I couldn't possibly stay in London knowing my dearest friend is surrounded by murderers and mud. Besides, the trains were ghastly today, all those people breathing. Charles Fraith, lounging against the fireplace as though it belonged to him, smirked. Carsley isn't quite the West End, Roy. You may be disappointed. Roy ignored him completely, flinging himself onto the sofa beside Hodge's boiler. Hodge hissed mildly, but Roy cooed, Hello, darling creature. And Hodge, traitor that he was, settled back down. Agatha clapped her hands. Right, let's get started. We're making a suspect list. Bill groaned quietly. Charles perked up. A classic approach. Shall I fetch a flip chart? Don't be ridiculous, Agatha snapped. We're using paper. She slapped a notepad onto the table. Now, based on gossip, the torn list, and Carsley's natural capacity for idiocy, our prime suspects are as follows. She wrote the first name with dramatic flourish. Agatha read aloud, rumoured to have borrowed funds from the W.I. Kitty. Charles snorted. Borrowed? He practically financed his holiday in Torquay. Bill looked pained. There is absolutely no proof of that. There doesn't need to be, Agatha said. This is Carsley. If two people say it, it's practically law. Roy ate a wafer. He did always look guilty, poor love, Agatha continued writing. Ruined Mrs. Boggle's perm 3 years ago. Roy gasped. Oh, I remember that. Mrs. Boggle said she looked like a distressed poodle. Tamsin never forgave her, Agatha said, and she's defensive whenever anyone mentions curlers. Bill frowned. That hardly counts as motive. You clearly don't go to hairdressers, Agatha said. It's motive, trust me. She added the next name. Mrs. Boggle's special friend, or so she claimed. Charles raised a brow. Special in what sense? Agatha ignored him. He was seen visiting her cottage late at night. Doris swears she heard arguing. Bill flipped open a small notebook. Martin said he'd been fixing her gutters. And I fix my oven by hitting it with a slipper, Agatha said. Point is, he's close to the victim. Roy leaned in conspiratorially. Close enough to kill her? Possibly, Agatha said, enjoying the drama. She wrote the final name. Dangerously fond of secrets, Agatha announced. Charles chuckled. She's fond of baking too. Cake, gossip, and petty feuds, the holy trinity. Agatha nodded. She knew everyone's business. Mrs. Boggle may have stolen her spotlight. Bill held up his hands. All right. We have names. Now can we discuss actual evidence? Oh, look at him, Roy said affectionately, trying to bring order to chaos. Agatha waved away their chatter. We're interviewing each suspect. Bill, you're coming with me. Bill blinked. No, you are not dragging me. But Roy had already flung Agatha's scarf around her shoulders. Go on. Solve crime. Shine bright. Hodge sneezed, unimpressed. Mr. Pargeter answered his door looking like a man who had slept badly and expected worse. His eyes darted around Agatha and Bill as if trying to determine whether they had warrants. We just want to ask a few things, Bill said gently. Mr. Pargeter wrung his hands. I told you I paid back the money. Agatha raised an eyebrow. So you admit you borrowed it? He coloured. I may have accidentally misallocated some funds. On what? Agatha demanded. A romantic weekend, he whispered. Bill choked. Agatha smirked. With whom? That's private, Mr. Pargeter squeaked. Agatha leaned in. Did Mrs. Boggle know? His silence was answer enough. Right, Agatha said, triumphant. Next suspect. Tamsin's salon smelled of hairspray and ambition. She stood behind her chair, arms crossed, looking ready to attack with scissors. I didn't kill her, she announced before either of them spoke. Guilty conscience, Agatha said sweetly. Tamsin scowled. She never forgave me for that perm. Went around telling people I'd fried her hair. Did you? Agatha asked. That woman's hair was already a fire hazard. Bill stepped between them. Tamsin, did Mrs. Boggle ever threaten you? Tamsin hesitated. She said she had notes about everyone, including me. What kind of notes? Agatha pressed. Tamsin shrugged. No idea. She liked stirring trouble. Probably wrote down who bought cheap conditioner. Agatha added a mental tick. Mrs. Boggle had been collecting dirt for a while. Martin Cleave was a broad, red-faced man with a shy demeanour and a habit of wiping his hands on his trousers every 10 seconds. Agatha detested shy men. They were impossible to bully effectively. Martin, Bill said, you visited Mrs. Boggle often? To fix things, Martin mumbled. Agatha pounced. Did you argue with her? He shook his head too quickly. No, well, sometimes. She liked attention. Did she confide in you? Bill asked. Martin swallowed hard. She told me she had something that would rock the village foundations. Said she kept it locked up, a metal box, hidden. Agatha jerked upright. A box? Martin nodded miserably. She wouldn't tell me what was inside. Agatha's heart buzzed like a faulty radio. A locked box. A key found on a corpse. Something secret enough to kill for. She thanked Martin briskly and dragged Bill out before he could lecture her on police procedure. Ethel answered the door with a tray of rock-hard scones and a suspicious glare. I suppose you're here about Boggle, she sniffed. Indeed, Agatha said. You hated her. So did you, Agatha spluttered. I didn't hate her. I disliked her enthusiastically. Ethel shrugged. She had secrets on all of us, collected them like teacups. Did she collect anything from Evesham? Bill asked. Ethel paused. The pause said everything. She was always getting envelopes from there, Ethel admitted. Thick ones, official-looking. Agatha felt a surge of triumph. Blackmail correspondence. Bill shot her a warning look. Speculation. Accurate speculation, Agatha countered. Ethel folded her arms. If she was blackmailing anyone, it wasn't me. Everyone in Carsley always claimed that. Back at Agatha's cottage, the team reconvened. Roy lay sprawled across the sofa like a migraine wearing trousers. Well, he asked theatrically. Agatha paced. Mrs. Boggle lied to everyone. She had dirt on everyone. She was receiving envelopes from Evesham. She carried that key everywhere, and she had a locked metal box hidden somewhere. Bill sighed. We don't know that she was blackmailing people. Oh, please, Agatha said. This is Mrs. Boggle, not Mother Teresa. Charles raised a finger. The real question, where's the box now? Agatha stopped pacing. Her eyes gleamed. In her cottage, she whispered. It has to be. Bill stiffened. Agatha, don't even think about it. I'm already past thinking, she said. I'm planning. Charles applauded softly. Roy cheered. Hodge blinked judgmentally. Bill groaned into his hands. Agatha snatched her coat. We're breaking in tonight. Hodge stretched atop the boiler, unimpressed by the emerging criminal conspiracy. Bill would only spoil the fun, Agatha said briskly, which was her polite way of saying Bill would insist on doing things legally. Charles, standing beside her at the edge of Mrs. Boggle's front path, eyed the dark little cottage with a sceptical look. You do realize, he drawled, that this counts as breaking and entering. This, Agatha corrected, counts as assisting an under-resourced rural police force. If they had any sense, they'd pay me. It was dusk, that unhelpful time of day when everything looked a shade more sinister than it deserved. Mrs. Boggle's cottage huddled behind its unruly hedge, curtains drawn, front garden full of dead pots and judgment. The lane was quiet. Too quiet, in Agatha's opinion. Ghastly quiet always meant someone was peering from behind net curtains. She held up the small metal key Bill had finally allowed her to inspect. It had taken an hour of wearing her most injured expression and reminding him of all the cases she had solved. In the end, he'd muttered something about temporarily releasing it for comparative purposes and shoved it into her hand. Are you sure that's wise? Charles asked. Of course it isn't, Agatha said. That's half the point. She strode up to the door, heart thudding with a mixture of excitement and something that felt suspiciously like nerves. Breaking into a cottage was one thing. Breaking into a dead woman's cottage, when that dead woman had kept a blackmail ledger, was quite another. The front door was locked, which was disappointing but expected. Agatha tried the key anyway. It didn't fit. I assume, Charles said mildly, you also brought a crowbar. Don't be stupid, she paused. We're using the back door. Round the back, the garden was even more neglected. A broken bird bath leaned like a drunk. An old washing line sagged under the weight of nothing. The kitchen door, mercifully, had an old-fashioned lock. Agatha tried the metal key again on a whim. No success. Useless woman, she muttered. Mrs. Boggle or you? Charles inquired. She ignored him and tested the handle. It resisted for a moment, then gave with the offended squeak of a door that felt boundaries were important. Unlocked, Charles said. How careless of her. Or how convenient for us, Agatha replied, pushing it open. The smell hit them first. Must, old cooking fat, and something floury that had turned sour. The tiny kitchen was cluttered with unwashed cups and a dozen chipped plates stacked in precarious towers. A calendar on the wall still showed last month, full of tiny, spidery notes. Agatha flicked on the light. Right, we're looking for a metal lockbox, probably small, hidden where she could gloat over it. Charles glanced at the calendar. You think it will be labelled Secret Hoard of Extortion Materials? Knowing her, yes. They moved through the cottage. The sitting room looked as though it had been arranged during a moment of deep spite. Every surface held something: porcelain cats, framed photographs, tiny glass ornaments shaped like roses. The floral carpet seemed to seethe underfoot. Agatha took one look at the mantelpiece and felt her eye twitch. I hate knickknacks. They're a sign of a guilty conscience. Charles picked up a porcelain cat and turned it over. Or a sign of bad taste. Put that down, Agatha hissed. We don't want Bill saying we contaminated the scene. I would argue the scene was contaminated the moment Mrs. Boggle chose wallpaper, he said. Agatha began opening drawers carefully, telling herself that Bill would thank her when she handed him the solution on a plate. Receipts, old WI leaflets, pension letters, a carefully filed set of supermarket vouchers, all expired. Incredible, she muttered. She catalogued discounts the way most people catalogue sins. She moved to a glass-fronted cabinet and opened it. That was when the catastrophe happened. A porcelain cat, nudged by her sleeve, tipped. Agatha lunged to catch it, collided with the cabinet shelf, and watched in horror as an entire row of cats, smug, staring, hideous, slid forward in slow motion. "Charles!" she yelped. He He had the nerve to step back out of the way. The first cat hit the floor with a delicate smash. The others followed in a cascading chorus of breaking china. Shards skittered across the carpet. One rolled under the armchair like a fleeing accomplice. The silence afterwards was total. "Well," Charles said thoughtfully, "on the bright side, that's one less witness." "Shut up," Agatha hissed, cheeks blazing. "They were already dead." He gave a helpless little snort of laughter. It grew into a proper laugh, the kind he usually reserved for things happening to other people. He leaned against the doorframe, half-bent, trying to breathe. "Oh, do stop," Agatha snapped. "She traumatized half the village. I've just liberated them." Charles wiped his eyes. If Bill sees this, he'll assume she was murdered by vengeful ornaments. Agatha ignored him and carried on searching. Behind the armchair, she found a stack of files neatly labelled. Pargeter, read one. Tonks, another. Cleave, a third. Each folder was thick with paper. Gossip files, evidence piles. Mrs. Boggle had been thorough. She flipped open the Pargeter file, copies of bank statements, hotel bookings, notes in Mrs. Boggle's tight handwriting. "Does wife know?" "Blackmail," Agatha breathed. "Good old-fashioned rural blackmail." Charles peered over her shoulder. She was an artist. "We'll look properly later," Agatha said. "The lockbox is more important." They moved into the bedroom, even more cramped than the sitting room. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern that had lost both colour and dignity. Drawers yielded nightdresses and underwear in shades no one under 80 would willingly purchase. "Search under the bed," Agatha ordered. "You search under the bed," Charles replied. "I have a delicate constitution." She gritted her teeth, knelt, and lifted the bedspread. Dust bunnies stared back at her. A pair of slippers, a box of tissues, a magazine about royal weddings, and pushed right to the back, a square metal shape. Her heart jumped. "Got you." She dragged out the small metal lockbox, paint flaking, corners dented. It had a keyhole in the front. Charles whistled. How very Agatha Christie. She pulled the Brook key from her pocket. Her fingers shook slightly as she pushed it in. It resisted, then turned with a satisfying click. The lid lifted. Inside lay a stack of notes and papers. The top layer was cash, £20 notes folded neatly. She counted quickly. £300, she said. Not a fortune, but a tidy sum. Blackmail entry fees, Charles suggested. Beneath the money were letters. Agatha unfolded one. It was typed and blunt. "You will repay the full amount by Friday, or I will speak to your wife and the WI. You know I keep records." Signed, in careful pen, Mrs. Boggle. Agatha felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She flipped through more letters. Similar wording, different names. She recognized most of them. Quiet people, dull people, people who normally only appeared on rota lists. Minor misdeeds, she murmured. Affairs, borrowed funds, small lies. She squeezed them all. Charming, Charles said. If she'd aimed higher, she might have died in Monaco instead of a brook. At the bottom of the box were typed notes, single sheets with bullet points. Each one listed a person's name, followed by curt details. Drank too much, crashed car, covered up. Checks bouncing, hiding debt. False charity claims. Agatha's stomach turned. She was building a library. "Of leverage," Charles said softly. And then she saw the envelope. It lay flat beneath the notes, cream paper, sealed. On the front, in Mrs. Boggle's spidery handwriting, "If anything happens to me, give to Mrs. A. Raisin." Agatha stared. For a moment, everything else in the room receded. Charles leaned closer. "Now that," he said, "is ominous." Agatha snatched it up. "Why me?" "Perhaps she admired you," he suggested. "Don't be ridiculous." She was incapable of admiration. This is either a trap or a final act of spite. "Both can be true," Charles said. He reached for the envelope. "I should probably open that. For safety." "Over my dead body," Agatha snapped. She broke the seal before he could stop her. Inside was a single stapled document. 12 names, all Castley villagers. Each name had a figure beside it, pounds owing. Some amounts were small, some considerable. At the bottom of the page, in smaller type, an extra note. Her own name. Agatha Raisin. Humiliation due, not money. For a moment, the room burned scarlet. "That vicious old bat," she whispered. "She was planning something." Charles took the list gently from her fingers. At least you weren't being charged interest. This isn't funny, Agatha said, though her voice shook. She wanted to ruin me, publicly. He looked at her more carefully then, the humour softening a little. You did manage that demonstration at the WI all by yourself. Agatha let out a sharp, unwilling laugh. Trust you to find the only worse thing to say. She snatched the list back, eyes skimming the other names. These people all had something to hide. She was feeding on it. Charles picked up one of the letters and turned it over. Evesham postmark, he observed, several of them. Perhaps she had a friendly printer. Agatha frowned. An accomplice? It's possible, he said, or a helpful clerk with loose morals and a photocopier. She filed it away in her mind, but it felt like a side path, dangerous and intriguing, but not yet the road she needed. The real path lay with the names on that list and the bruises on Mrs. Boggle's wrists. Agatha replaced the papers in the box, save for the list and the letter addressed to her. Those she kept. Bill would complain later. She would pretend not to hear. As she stood, something gave under her foot. There was a crack, a groan, and then the floor vanished. Agatha yelped as her leg plunged through the rotted floorboard up to the knee. Pain shot up her thigh. She grabbed the bed frame to steady herself, fury flaring. Charles stared for a heartbeat, then doubled over laughing. "You absolute swine," she gasped. "Get me out." "I'm sorry," he wheezed. "It's just, you look like you're being eaten by the house." Charles Fraith, "If you don't help me this instant, I will leave you in here when the police arrive and tell them you were practicing interpretive burglary." That seemed to galvanize him. He hauled her up with a strong arm, setting her back on solid boards. Agatha winced and tested her ankle. Bruised but functional. Her dignity was in worse condition. "I am never," she announced, "coming into this cottage again." "Then let's leave," Charles said, "before the floor files a complaint." They switched off the lights, leaving the cottage to its dust and secrets. Outside, the dusk had deepened to a bluish gloom. The lane felt narrower somehow, the hedges too close, as if the village were listening. Agatha locked the back door out of habit, then caught herself. "She's dead," she muttered. "Who am I protecting?" "Your conscience," Charles said lightly. "It enjoys the illusion of respectability." They stepped into the overgrown path, the cottage behind them now a dark blot. Agatha clutched the envelope and list in her handbag, fingers tight around the leather strap. The Evesham postmarks nagged at her, the cash, the debts, the names. Halfway down the path she stopped. Someone was standing at the gate, a shape just beyond the line of the hedge, tall, still, watching, not moving to greet them, not calling out, just there. "Do you see that?" she whispered. "Yes," Charles said quietly. "I do." They walked forward together, slowly. By the time they reached the corner, the figure had gone, melted into the lane, the gardens, the comforting nothing of village night. Agatha stood very still, listening to the hush of distant television sets and the faint clink of crockery from neighbouring kitchens. "Someone knows we were in there," she said. Charles glanced back at the dark, silent cottage. Aggie, half the village probably knows, but only one of them was lurking. Later, in her own kitchen, with Hodge stretched luxuriously on the table and the kettle sighing itself to sleep, Agatha unfolded Mrs. Boggle's list again. The ink looked darker in her warm little cottage, the figures more accusatory. She stroked Hodge's back with one finger. "All right," she murmured. "If she thought humiliation would stop me digging, she picked the wrong woman." Hodge rolled onto his side, paws in the air, utterly unconcerned. Agatha gave a small, grim smile. The village might be watching. Someone might be frightened. Someone might be furious. She lit a single cigarette, took one determined drag, and stubbed it out. Tomorrow, she decided, the people on Mrs. Boggle's list were going to talk. "Agatha Raisin, I demand to know!" shouted Mrs. Perry from across the Red Lion's sunlit interior. The village had already gathered, spilling into the narrow bar like a flock of startled pigeons, all whispering and jabbering with the urgent energy of people who knew secrets. "I demand to know if I'm on that list," repeated a sharp voice belonging to Mrs. Weatherby, clutching a half-finished knitting project for comfort. Agatha, leaning against the bar with Hodge's latest ball of yarn tangled around her ankle, raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. "Do you really think I would confirm anything?" she asked, allowing the faintest trace of her usual theatrical exasperation to slip in. You would simply be encouraging the gossip that this village thrives upon." "Then it is true," Mrs. Perry gasped, eyes wide. "You are on the list." "Don't be ridiculous," Agatha replied, lifting a hand to steady herself. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." The silence that followed was delicious, if fleeting. It did not last. The villagers' murmurs swelled into a tide of conspiratorial conjecture. Denial in Carsley was as good as confession, it seemed. Mrs. Blocksby, standing near the fireplace with a calmness cultivated from years of village disasters, placed a gentle hand on Agatha's arm. "Remember, dear, blackmail thrives on fear. The less they know, the safer you are." Agatha shot her a grateful look, drawing a deep, satisfying breath. Hodge, perched elegantly atop the bar stool, flicked his tail with what could only be described as feline judgment. Bill Wong stepped forward from the crowd, carrying his usual aura of quiet practicality. "Several villagers have received envelopes from Mrs. Boggle demanding repayment," he reported. "Most have paid. One individual has refused, but I don't yet know who." He looked at Agatha. "We need to narrow the motives before the police arrive. Timing is essential." Agatha, who never needed any external prompting, nodded sharply. "Very well. I will begin compiling the patterns. Hodge, you supervise as usual." The cat blinked, unimpressed, and returned to licking his paw. The day moved forward with the inescapable hum of village gossip. Agatha visited the various households, ostensibly delivering a message of goodwill, while subtly extracting information through pointed questions, raised eyebrows, and occasional small doses of mild threats. Each interaction painted a more complicated picture. Mr. Pargeter had indeed defaulted on payments, though his desperation seemed financial rather than malicious. Tamsin Birtle's permanent disaster, as expected, had left a deep vein of lingering bitterness. Martin Cleave's close association with Mrs. Boggle invited speculation, but offered no concrete admissions, and Ethel Tonks, naturally, knew far more than she would admit. By early afternoon, Agatha had returned to her cottage. Hodge sprawled across the windowsill as though guarding the strategic headquarters. Charles Fraith, slouched against the wall, sipped a cup of tea with exaggerated care. "You look pleased with yourself," he said. "I am," Agatha replied, tapping her fingers against her chin. "Patterns are emerging. There is the unpaid final notice, the envelopes, the cash flow. The motives are aligning beautifully." Charles's smile was indulgent. "Beautifully? Aggie, this sounds more like a Shakespearean comedy than a mystery." "Comedy with deadly implications," Agatha countered, frowning. "This is serious business. Mrs. Boggle is dead, and her machinations are still breathing down our necks." The next village event was the WI meeting, and it promised to be a battleground. Agatha, armed with her usual combination of charm and exasperation, entered the hall, her teal dress crisply pressed and her expression carefully unreadable. The room fell quiet for the fraction of a second before erupting in whispers. She caught Tamsin Birtle glowering from the back, arms crossed, her chair angled as if preparing for battle. "Ah," Tamsin began sharply, "so it is true. You stole Mrs. Boggle's files, didn't you, Agatha Raisin?" Agatha blinked, then smiled. Slowly. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make her point. "Steal," she said. "My dear, I have no interest in anything that might soil my reputation. Unlike some, I simply observe." She leaned forward, voice dripping with insinuation. "Although, of course, Mrs. Boggle might have used even a simple haircut against me. One does wonder what lengths she went to." The muttering grew into outright chatter. One woman whispered about a mismanaged perm. Another suggested someone had faked illness to avoid paying a debt. Agatha flourished, letting the room turn itself inside out while she enjoyed the subtle theatre of collective unease. Doris Simpson, seated in the corner, turned up the volume of her hearing aid just as Agatha attempted a carefully constructed speech on justice and honesty. Every other word was lost in a whine of high-pitched interference, leaving the room in confusion and forcing Agatha to cut her sentence short. She shot Doris a mock glare, which elicited a small, apologetic smile. "The universe conspires," Agatha muttered under her breath. Mrs. Blocksby, however, remained a stabilizing presence. She offered Agatha a cup of tea and a quiet nod, reinforcing the truth that composure and warmth were sometimes the best shields against a tidal wave of suspicion. Bill finally approached, lowering his voice. I know who refused to pay. Agatha leaned closer. Do you? Yes, it's Mr. Pargeter, he said, and he has no alibi for the night Mrs. Boggle disappeared. A hush descended. Charles looked between Agatha and Bill, eyes wide. No alibi? That changes everything. Agatha nodded, already calculating. The unpaid blackmail aligned perfectly with the torn page Bill had found. This was no coincidence. The village's mild-mannered treasurer suddenly had motive, opportunity, and, potentially, the cunning to cover his tracks. Roy Silver, who had drifted in mid-morning and now hovered near the window, flung an arm dramatically. Well, this is turning into a proper melodrama. I do hope someone is recording it for posterity, or at least for next month's society column. Do sit down, Roy, Agatha said dryly, resisting the urge to remind him that melodrama was her métier. Tamsin Birtle, clearly discomfited by Agatha's insinuation about her hairdressing disasters, muttered something about professional reputation and stalked out. The room's atmosphere, previously tense, now shifted into mutinous whispers and sidelong glances. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. Chaos, when guided properly, was highly revealing. Bill leaned closer, lowering his voice further. Be careful with assumptions. Morton in Marsh is involved in the wider correspondence, but that may be a red herring. Agatha nodded. Of course. We'll tread lightly, but the focus is clear. Mr. Pargeter's refusal, the torn page, the list, it all points toward him. The rest is theatre. As the WI meeting dispersed, villagers buzzing with speculation and whispered accusations, Agatha stayed behind briefly to gather her notes. Hodge, ever vigilant, jumped from the windowsill onto her lap. She stroked his fur absently, mind whirring. The game is becoming clearer, she murmured. And yet, someone is watching. I can feel it. The kettle in the corner of the room sighed softly, a domestic punctuation to the village's cacophony. Agatha poured herself a cup of tea, careful not to spill, and let the warmth seep into her hands. Hodge purred, stretching luxuriously atop her chair, and for a moment the tension eased, softened by the small, intimate comforts of home. She folded her notes neatly and tucked them into her bag, ready to follow the trail further tomorrow. Every conversation, every glance, every whispered fear in Carsley contributed to the unfolding puzzle. Agatha's pride, sharpened by humiliation and vindication alike, compelled her onward. The village might be buzzing, but Agatha Raisin was already several steps ahead, planning her next move. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring further revelations, and perhaps justice. Hodge blinked slowly, clearly approving of her determination. The kettle gave a soft sigh, steam curling lazily into the dim evening light. Agatha, with a faint wry smile, muttered, "Let's see who blinks first, Hodge. Let's see who blinks first." And in that small, quiet moment, the Cotswold cottage held its secrets and its mysteries, humming with the promise of discoveries yet to come. "Mr. Pargeter, I don't have all day," Agatha said, folding her arms across her chest. Hodge had settled on the windowsill, tail flicking, eyes narrowed in judgment. The cat clearly considered this interrogation beneath him, but he remained present for moral support. The village treasurer, a man whose ties never quite aligned and whose waistcoat strained at the buttons, sat trembling in Agatha's cottage. His face was blotchy with tears, his hands wringing the edge of a chair. I didn't touch her," he stammered, voice cracking. "I swear on my late mother's grave, I never—" "Sit," Agatha said sharply, pulling a chair closer, "and take a deep breath. We're all friends here. Mostly, sort of." He nodded, eyes swimming. "It's just Mrs. Boggle. She caught me borrowing WI funds," he admitted, voice dropping to a whisper. I needed it for a weekend away, a romantic weekend for a secret lover." Agatha blinked. "You mean you were embezzling to impress someone?" He sniffled. "I was broke. She threatened to tell if I didn't repay, but I had nothing. I didn't touch her. I swear it." Bill Wong, standing behind her, rubbed his chin. So he had motive to lie about repayment, but not to harm her. "Exactly," Agatha said, tapping her finger against her notepad. "A man caught in debt, guilty of borrowing, terrified of exposure, but not dangerous, not murderous." The room fell silent for a beat. Then there was a sudden thump at the door. Roy Silver swept in, hat tilted at a jaunty angle and feather wobbling precariously. "Darlings, I have intelligence from Evesham," he announced, plopping dramatically into the nearest chair. "I encountered a woman who claims she supplied Mrs. Boggle with envelopes." "Bulk orders," she whispered. "Bulk orders." Agatha raised a sceptical eyebrow. "And you understood everything she said?" Roy waved a dismissive hand. "I caught the gist. Carried away with the excitement, you understand. Danger lurks in every postmark, Agatha." "Danger lurks in your wardrobe, Roy," Charles muttered from the corner, suppressing a grin. Roy's feathered hat had a tendency to wobble dangerously with every gesture. "Details, Charles. I'm fully undercover," Roy said, brandishing a small notebook as though it were a ceremonial dagger. Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. "Roy, you are not undercover. You are a distraction." "Distraction? I'm essential reconnaissance," he declared, flapping the notebook like a flag. "And if anything happens, I will be heroic." Hodge mewed once, sharp and pointed. The sound could have been interpreted as either agreement or a warning. "Let's focus," Agatha said. "Who else did Mrs. Boggle see last night?" Charles tilted his head, recalling his own notes. Martin Cleeve. He was seen visiting her cottage the evening before she died. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Last person to see her alive, potentially. Bill leaned forward. "He claims he went to end their arrangement." "Arrangement?" Agatha asked. "Nothing illicit." Martin's voice was strained when she called him later. "Merely a personal matter. Ended it, that's all." Agatha noted the tension in his shoulders, the rapid blink, the careful avoidance of eye contact. "He's rattled," she murmured. "The question is, rattled because he fears exposure, or rattled because he did something more?" Hodge jumped down from the windowsill, pacing in small circles as though encouraging her to make sense of it. "Roy's intelligence is largely theatrical," Charles said. "A print shop clerk, nothing more. Evesham envelopes? A harmless clerk with a paper cutter." Agatha nodded. "Exactly. Misleading, but tempting. A classic red herring." Roy, undeterred, tapped the feather atop his head. "You see, my hat doubles as a radar. No one notices subtle details like the tilt of a brim." Agatha ignored him. She needed results, not style lessons. Bill interjected. "We need a clear timeline. Pargeter's admission explains motive for non-payment. Martin's visit establishes opportunity. The rest is colour." "Colour and chaos," Agatha muttered, eyeing the feathered hat with undisguised suspicion. "I like it when patterns emerge. Too neat, and I worry. Too messy, and the truth gets lost." Charles, sipping tea delicately, raised a finger. "We also have Mrs. Bloxby's insight. She says Mrs. Boggle kept a second secret list, hidden somewhere no one has found." Agatha's pulse quickened. "A second list? That could contain anyone. The whole village, perhaps." Bill adjusted his glasses. "Potentially a minefield of motives." "Exactly," Agatha said, pacing the room. "We need strategy. Start with what we know. Pargeter, guilty of non-payment, opportunity minimal. Martin, last visitor, distressed. Roy, superfluous, others observed, not confirmed." Hodge sat beside her feet, tail flicking thoughtfully. Agatha paused to scratch behind his ears. He seemed to agree, logic first, theatrics second. "Roy," she said, "your reconnaissance was colourful, helpful in the abstract, distracting in reality." "But visually memorable," he protested, flapping the feather. "You are memorably ridiculous," Agatha corrected, noting a flicker of amusement in Charles's eyes. The day faded into evening. Agatha sat at her small desk, reviewing notes and sipping tea. Hodge curled atop a stack of papers, purring contentedly. The house smelled faintly of brewing biscuits and candle wax. Outside, the village settled into the quiet rhythm of night, unaware of the silent calculations taking place within her cottage. She tapped the pencil against her lips. Martin's visit, Pargeter's refusal, the envelopes from Evesham, Roy's theatrical feathered hat, all pieces of a puzzle with edges she had yet to see clearly. Hodge stretched, yawning audibly, and Agatha allowed herself a small smile. The cat had a way of reminding her that even amidst chaos, some comforts remained constant. She reviewed the list of villagers implicated in Mrs. Boggle's schemes. Names, debts, secrets, some petty, some consequential. Each could be motivated, each could be innocent. Her fingers drummed on the tabletop. "Tomorrow," she whispered, We follow Martin's trail, check Pargeter's alibi, and see what secrets remain hidden. That second list will tell us everything. Charles, still seated, murmured, "And you plan to find it tonight, I presume?" Agatha's lips curved into a thin, determined line. "Patience, Charles. We gather information first. We act decisively later." A sudden squeak from the kitchen caught her attention. Hodge had jumped down, sniffing something unfamiliar. Agatha followed him to the doorway, discovering the kettle letting out a soft sigh, steam curling like a ghost of domestic normality. Mrs. Bloxby's voice, gentle and steady, reminded her from the hallway. "Agatha, remember, fear and secrets make people behave strangely. Keep your wits about you." Agatha nodded, setting her teacup down. "I intend to," she said, quiet and resolute. Hodge twitched his whiskers, eyes half closed in satisfaction, clearly approving of her plan. The village outside was dark, sleepy, and full of secrets. Inside, Agatha Raisin was alert, calculating, and already plotting her next move. Somewhere in Carsley, the second list waited. Hidden, yes, but not for long. Hodge curled back into his usual loaf shape on the desk. The kettle sighed again. Agatha lit a single cigarette, took a slow drag, and stubbed it out, the glow briefly illuminating the determined set of her jaw. Tomorrow, she thought, we unravel everything, and whoever thought they were safe under Mrs. Boggle's shadow would find that Agatha Raisin had arrived to illuminate the truth, swiftly, mercilessly, and with impeccable style. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small, wry smile. The game was truly afoot. Hodge blinked slowly, a silent, approving witness. The candlelight flickered, the pages of notes rustled, and Carsley's night held its breath. Agatha Raisin, mistress of gossip and detective work alike, was ready to turn whispers into confessions, and to do it in her own sharp, brilliant way. "Honestly, Hodge," Agatha muttered, jabbing at the cat with a slipper, "you could at least pretend to supervise." Hodge, sitting atop a high shelf like a furry sentinel, blinked slowly. The picture of feline disdain. He had clearly decided that watching humans flail about was infinitely more entertaining than helping. Agatha grumbled, kicking aside a stray ball of yarn as she scanned the WI storage cupboard. Her mind was made up. The first list had revealed minor misdeeds, petty debts, and humiliation. The second list, she was certain of it, held the more serious, dangerous secrets. It had to be somewhere in the tangle of boxes, old raffle prizes, forgotten WI banners, and a particularly suspicious stack of unused tea towels. "Private," she murmured, reading the faint ink scrawled across the top of an envelope tucked behind a pile of consolation chocolates. Her heart thudded. Even a modest sleuth like herself recognized the kind of handwriting that meant serious business. She tore open the envelope with deliberate care. Inside lay a second list. Larger sums, more consequential offences. Agatha's eyes skimmed rapidly. Overcharging villagers for produce, forged signatures, falsified petitions. Names she knew, reputations she admired or tolerated, now lay bare. One name stood out. Ethel Tonks. The largest amount was scrawled beside hers. Agatha lifted her head, eyes narrowing. "Well, Ethel, this looks unpleasant for you." Ethel's eyes widened, and her hand trembled as she adjusted the scarf that she clutched like a talisman. I didn't mean any harm," she stammered. "You forged petitions," Agatha said crisply. "You made the village sign documents they never saw, didn't you?" Ethel blinked. I didn't have a choice. Mrs. Boggle, she caught me, demanded payment, threatened to tell everyone." Agatha leaned forward. "Payment or exposure?" Ethel swallowed audibly. "Both." The cat stretched languidly atop the shelf. Hodge was unimpressed. Agatha ignored him. "And yet," she said, tapping a finger against the envelope, "you also saw something the night Mrs. Boggle died." Ethel hesitated. I saw someone leaving her house. Tall, wearing a long coat. I thought it was a woman, but... Ethel glanced down, sheepish. "I only guessed it was a woman. I didn't see clearly. It could have been a man." Agatha's mind raced. Martin Cleave had been the last visitor, yes, but this was clearly someone else. The second list, larger offences, a new eyewitness account. Carsley's social fabric suddenly felt far more dangerous. "Show me exactly where you saw this figure," Agatha demanded. Ethel led her to a narrow lane behind the vicarage, gesturing vaguely. Agatha made mental notes about vantage points, shadows, and the figure's estimated height. Everything was valuable. Returning to the storage cupboard, Agatha manoeuvred Ethel back among the boxes, intending to examine the envelope more closely. That was when disaster struck. The door, old and painted many times over, jammed spectacularly. Agatha pushed. Ethel pushed. Nothing. The door refused to budge. "I told you," Ethel wailed. "We're stuck." Agatha's jaw set. "I didn't think I'd be trapped in a cupboard with a gossiping spinster today, but here we are." She rolled her eyes at Hodge, who had slipped inside the cupboard through the cat flap moments earlier and now surveyed them with the smug satisfaction only a cat could achieve. Minutes passed. Agatha's patience, usually long for such situations, began to fray. "Honestly," she muttered, "and to think people say I'm dramatic." Charles Fraith, on cue, arrived at the scene, attracted by the commotion. "Trapped?" he asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Do I fetch crowbars, dynamite, or merely a polite apology?" Agatha glared. "Get Bill." Bill Wong appeared, calm and measured as always, and shook his head in that exasperated way that only he could manage. He jiggled the lock with professional patience, muttering about hinges and warped wood. Within moments the door gave with a triumphant creak. Agatha and Ethel tumbled into his arms, figuratively, not literally, dusting themselves off with as much dignity as could be mustered. Hodge padded out behind them, tail high, surveying their incompetence with mild condescension. Back in her cottage, Agatha carefully laid the second list on the table. She spread out the papers, scrutinizing the names, sums and notes. The scale of Mrs. Boggle's operation was now clear. More serious offences, higher stakes. Small debts were nothing compared to deliberate falsifications and petty crimes. Ethel stood beside her, still pale from the cupboard incident. I really didn't see much," she admitted. "The figure, tall, coat. I wasn't sure if it was Martin or—" Agatha considered her carefully. "Thank you. Your honesty is useful. Sometimes the best clues come from uncertainty." She tapped the envelope. "We must factor this into the investigation. Clearly, we have a new suspect." Charles peeked over her shoulder. "And all the while the entire village remains blissfully unaware of how neatly we're unravelling their secrets." "Blissfully unaware or blissfully frightened," Agatha corrected. "Fear is often the most reliable motivator." The evening progressed with Agatha mapping out her next steps. The second list had changed the game entirely. She had previously assumed Martin and Pargeter were the central figures. Now she understood that the social web was broader, more complex. Each name, each sum, each exposure risk was a thread she needed to pull carefully. Hodge, resettled atop his usual perch, blinked at her. The cat's calm presence was a quiet reassurance that amidst the chaos, some constants remained. Agatha sipped tea, letting warmth seep into her hands, and let her thoughts wander through the patterns. The WI, the lists, the secrets, the threats, all pointed toward one inescapable truth. Someone strong, someone decisive, had physically grabbed Mrs. Boggle that night. Bill arrived with a folder already filled with the forensic results. "Bruising indicates she was grabbed by someone with considerable strength," he reported quietly. Agatha's fingers drummed against the tabletop. Strong and deliberate, not accidental, not an altercation gone minor. Someone intended to control her movements. Ethel shifted nervously. "Do you think that someone was after the lists?" Agatha considered. Certainly. The first list, the second list, they contained power, influence, secrets that could ruin people. Whoever took those papers wanted to wield that control. Charles, ever the observer, smirked. "And here I thought this would be a quiet evening with tea and mild speculation." Agatha gave him a sharp look. "Tea? Yes. Mild speculation? Hardly." She picked up the second list, her eyes scanning names again. Ethel's account, while tentative, had provided a direction. The figure in the long coat was no longer a shadowy thought, but a tangible lead. Hodge yawned. Agatha smiled faintly at him. "We'll need patience, Hodge, and cunning, and you'll keep watch, of course." The cat twitched an ear, clearly acknowledging the commission. The kettle sighed as it cooled. Agatha placed the second list carefully in her bag, making mental notes of each name and offence. The house felt still, almost conspiratorial, holding its breath in anticipation of the next step. Outside, the Cotswold night was calm, deceptive in its tranquility. Agatha glanced toward the window, thinking of the tall figure leaving Mrs. Boggle's cottage. Someone had acted with strength, with purpose. And now, thanks to the second list, she had a better understanding of why. She lit a single cigarette, inhaling deeply, and stubbed it out in the tray. The glow lingered briefly on her determined expression. "Tomorrow," she murmured, eyes on Hodge, "we find out who had the muscle, the motive, and the audacity to strike. And nothing, I swear, will stop me from uncovering the truth." Hodge stretched languidly on the sofa, tail flicking once in quiet approval. The kettle exhaled a final sigh of warmth, curling steam into the dim light. Agatha Raisin, resolute and sharp, was ready to confront the next layer of deception in Carsley. One secret, one lie, one truth at a time. "Martin Cleave, do you understand why I'm here?" Agatha asked, eyes narrowing as she perched on the edge of a chair in his tidy but slightly disordered lounge. Hodge, once again claiming the highest vantage point on the windowsill, twitched his tail in rhythmic judgment. Martin flinched, shoulders hunched, fingers drumming nervously against his coffee mug. I think so," he muttered, "but it's not what it looks like." Agatha's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nothing ever looks like it is with you, Martin. Explain yourself." He drew in a shaky breath. "Mrs. Boggle, she knew about something I tried desperately to forget. A mistake from my youth. A teenage conviction I never wanted anyone to know." His voice faltered. "She threatened exposure. I went to her house to beg her to stop, that's all." Agatha leaned back, measuring him. The man was physically strong, broad-shouldered, roughened by labour and habit, yet his voice carried the tremor of fear and shame. The contrast was almost theatrical. She had assumed guilt from demeanour alone, but perhaps assumptions had misled her. "You argue, yes?" she pressed. "Did it get heated?" "Yes, we argued." She raised her voice. "I tried reasoning, but I left. Alive." His eyes darted, unguarded, raw. "She was alive when I left, I swear it." Agatha's mind raced. His confession, honest and emotional, clarified much. Martin had motive, yes, but not for murder. He had been driven by fear, by shame, and by desperation to protect his secret. Yet Mrs. Boggle's death had not been his doing. "Then we must consider someone else," Agatha said, leaning forward. "Someone with motive beyond mere intimidation." Martin hesitated, shifting in his seat. "There's something else. She wasn't only blackmailing me. She was writing to someone else, threatening them for a serious crime, something grave." Agatha's pulse quickened. "A serious crime?" "Yes," he admitted. "And I don't know if it's connected to her death, but whoever she was threatening, they could have killed her." The room seemed to contract. Hodge twitched an ear, alert, though still upright on the sill, eyes fixed on Martin with an expression of mild indignation at human complexity. "All right," Agatha said, steadying her voice. "Think carefully. The second list, the physical strength needed, the coat-length silhouette observed, all point to someone particular, someone who moves with purpose, not hesitation, a person intimately aware of her routines." Martin's gaze fell. "You mean someone close to Pargeter?" Agatha nodded slowly. "Yes, someone capable of both force and secrecy, someone who could threaten her physically if necessary." He swallowed, visibly distressed. I won't say. I'd have to reveal a lover's identity. I'm protecting them." Agatha's mind ticked over each known fact. Mr. Pargeter's unpaid final notice, the larger blackmail sums, the physical evidence, bruising consistent with significant strength, not Martin's comparatively modest exertion. Someone else had to have been capable. Martin's presence that night explained none of the force applied to Mrs. Boggle. "Martin," she said gently, "if you protect them too well, the real culprit remains free. You need to tell me." He shook his head. "I can't. Not yet. If anyone knew, it would cause scandal. Worse, they might be hurt." Agatha sighed, half frustrated, half pleased. His loyalty revealed more about the true suspect than any forced confession could. A secret lover, hidden, privileged, and undoubtedly capable. Roy Silver, who had sidled into the room unannounced, chose that moment to make a flamboyant entrance, feathered hat wobbling perilously. "Darling, "I come bearing intelligence from Evesham," he exclaimed, flourishing a crumpled envelope. Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. "Roy, your intelligence is often creative. Do you have something concrete?" "Certainly," he said, brandishing the envelope dramatically. "A woman who sells envelopes, and she whispered secrets. Bulk orders, I think, or possibly treachery." Martin's eyes narrowed. "This is irrelevant." "Exactly," Agatha said. "Red herring." Roy's feather bounced with each word. "But visually impressive." Charles Fraith, lounging in the corner, allowed himself a small grin. "Yes, Roy, the hat might be the most dangerous thing in the room." Agatha ignored them both, turning back to Martin. "Think carefully. You visited her, you argued, you left her alive. But she was afraid, threatened, and someone else, someone unknown to us, is responsible for her death." Martin nodded, defeated. "Yes, someone else." Agatha made notes, quick, precise. The identity of the secret lover became central. Whoever it was had motive, strong, personal motive, and access, and knowledge of the second list's contents. Hodge leapt down from the windowsill, landing silently on the carpet, circling Agatha's feet. She glanced at him, sharing the unspoken realization. Intuition and observation were their allies. She would need both to unravel this next piece. "Martin," she said softly, "the lover's identity is crucial. Without it, the puzzle remains incomplete. But I promise, you're safe. Nothing will be revealed unnecessarily." He hesitated, then nodded, eyes filled with both relief and lingering dread. "I can't say more. Not yet. But I swear, I did not kill her." "Of course," Agatha said, watching the subtle tremble in his jaw. His honesty was evident in his emotions, not his words. "You are cleared in my mind. Your presence explains nothing about the bruising. Your secret, painful as it is not the crime." She leaned back, taking in the information, connecting threads, the unpaid debts, the physicality of the attack, the long coat seen leaving the cottage, an outsider with access to Pargeter's life, someone else entirely. Charles whistled softly. "So, Aggie, the love interest becomes the prime suspect." Agatha tapped her pencil thoughtfully. "Not necessarily the suspect in the act, but the key to understanding motive. If we identify them, we identify potential exposure, and from there the puzzle pieces may fall neatly into place." Roy, still fussing with the feather, muttered something about detective hats and the dramatic tension of secrecy. Agatha ignored him. Some things, like Roy's flair, were eternal distractions. Bill, ever practical, finally broke the quiet. "The forensic results indicate bruising consistent with someone strong, deliberate, and possibly angry. Martin could not have inflicted it alone." "Exactly," Agatha said, "and that fits with my deductions. The lover must be involved somehow, whether directly or indirectly. Everything points in that direction." Hodge curled atop the back of the sofa, tail flicking once. Agatha smiled faintly. His calm, measured presence was a reminder that even amidst human folly and secret sins, some things remained steadfast. Ethel Tonks had been frightened, Pargeter embarrassed, Martin distressed. But the second list, the letters, the bruising, all pointed toward a hidden connection, a shadowed figure whose identity was poised to shock Castley. Agatha lit a single cigarette, inhaling slowly. The glow briefly illuminated her determined expression. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we discover who this lover is. And then, finally, we understand the real story behind Mrs. Boggle's death." The cottage settled into a hush. Hodge's purring filled the space like a gentle metronome, punctuating the quiet contemplation. The kettle sighed softly in the background, steam curling in. "Oh, I think it looks quite exactly as it is. Missing funds, blackmail, Mrs. Boggle's death. Do you have an explanation, or will you flee?" Harold's legs tensed. But before he could answer, he bolted, racing into the shadows. Agatha cursed under her breath, pushing off the wall, her boots scuffing against the gravel. Hodge leapt gracefully to the ground, tail flicking in agitation. "Bill," she called, "he's running!" Bill, already in motion, took a more measured approach. "Agatha, he won't get far. Castley isn't London." Charles, who had appeared silently, smirked. "You did all the legwork, Aggie. Now you just get to enjoy the chase." The pursuit was short but tense. Harold darted between cottages, knocked over a rubbish bin, and skidded on a patch of damp leaves. Agatha and Bill, coordinated and observant, cut him off at the Red Lion's rear entrance. Breathless, Agatha confronted him. "Harold Tonks, step aside. We need answers, and hiding in corners won't help." Harold's shoulders slumped. The fight left him. Resignation settled in. I didn't mean for her to die," he admitted, voice low and shaking. "The envelopes, the debts. I just wanted her to leave me alone. I never thought—" Agatha listened carefully. The combination of desperation and arrogance had propelled him toward confrontation. He had motive, means, and the physicality to explain Mrs. Boggle's bruises. Bill observed quietly, making mental notes. "Everything matches," he murmured. "Financial motive, physical capability, and opportunity. He's our suspect." Hodge twitched an ear, unimpressed with the theatrics, but content that Agatha was finally approaching clarity. Agatha's sharp mind pieced the puzzle together. Edward's panic and flight, the second list, Mrs. Boggle's bruises, the envelope orders, and Harold's undisclosed debts, all intersected in a way that was, ironically, satisfying. "Harold," she said crisply, "we will sort this. Carsley may be small, but it's not forgiving. You must explain every action." The man's panic returned. He shuffled, glancing toward the quiet cottages, then back to her. I can't. People, they'll never understand." Agatha's expression softened slightly, recognizing desperation for what it was. "They will understand soon enough, but you will cooperate, for your own sake." At that moment, Mrs. Blocksby arrived quietly, her presence calm yet authoritative. She laid a hand lightly on Agatha's shoulder. "I know who the lover is," she whispered, eyes steady. "But revealing it will cause quite a stir." Agatha's lips curved into a small, wry smile. "We have everything we need then. Time to untangle the truth carefully." Hodge, finally settling atop the gatepost, blinked slowly, approving of the resolution in motion. The kettle in Agatha's cottage miles away would soon sigh its evening warmth, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Agatha watched Harold's retreating figure, understanding now the network of debts, secrets, and lies that had driven Mrs. Boggle's blackmail. Every thread pointed to resolution, though revelation would ripple across Carsley with significant consequences. She exhaled and muttered, "Justice at last," and chaos, as expected. The village, calm for now, awaited the next twist, but within her, Agatha felt the satisfaction of truth uncovered. She lit a single cigarette, taking a measured drag, allowing the glow to highlight the determination in her eyes. Hodge stretched, yawning audibly, curling into a perfect loaf shape on the windowsill. Agatha poured herself a cup of tea, steam curling, the warm scent grounding her in the domestic, even as the villagers' intrigue simmered. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be confessions, explanations, and perhaps faint apologies. But tonight, Carsley slept under the watchful eyes of Agatha Raisin, ever vigilant, ever clever, and perfectly capable of managing the secrets of an entire village. "Really, Mrs. Blocksby, is village life always this relentless?" Agatha asked, easing into her favourite armchair, Hodge promptly leaping onto her lap as though claiming a throne. The cat's smug expression suggested he approved of her suffering. "Relentless, perhaps," Mrs. Blocksby replied, pouring tea with measured precision. "But usually more amusing than dangerous." Agatha sniffed at the steaming cup. "Dangerous is relative, my dear. Last week I nearly had half the village hunting me across muddy fields." She cast a glance at Hodge, who twitched a tail in agreement. Mrs. Blocksby chuckled softly. "And you handled it remarkably. Very little bribery involved, if I recall." Agatha waved a hand, dismissing the compliment. "Barely. And all that stress for what? That infernal envelope." She reached for it, the paper still crisp, and opened it with theatrical caution. The contents fell into view, a single photocopied article from a past PR brochure, highlighting Agatha's supposed tendency to exaggerate her age. She blinked. That was it. The blackmail, reduced to faintly mortifying nostalgia. She sighed, part relief, part irritation. "Nothing?" Mrs. Blocksby asked, peering over her spectacles. "Nothing," Agatha confirmed, though the faint sting of embarrassment lingered. She tucked the envelope aside and lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. The smoke curled lazily, a small comfort in the quiet cottage. "Even nasty people," Mrs. Blocksby said gently, "eventually pay for their choices, not by curses but by life's own machinery." Agatha let out a rueful laugh. "Wise words, though I rather prefer revenge in a more immediate theatrical form." Hodge purred approvingly, kneading her lap with perfect feline grace. Agatha scratched behind his ear, appreciating the simplicity of his judgment-free presence. The doorbell chimed and Charles Fraith strolled in, hands in pockets, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. "So, the great Agatha Raisin survives blackmail unscathed. Admirable. I suppose you didn't even have to part with a single penny." Agatha arched an eyebrow, suppressing a smile. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Charles." "Not everywhere," he replied, seating himself on the arm of her chair. "I'd wager you still bear the tiniest sting of humiliation." She ignored him, pretending disinterest, though her thoughts flickered to the absurdity of it all. Letters, lists, accusations, chases, and near drownings, reduced now to a single photocopy. The village had tried to unsettle her. The universe, it seemed, had decided amusement was sufficient. Bill Wong arrived silently, carrying his usual calm. "I trust all is quiet, Agatha." "Quiet enough," she replied, sipping tea, "though I suspect quiet in Castley is merely the pause before further storms." Bill smiled faintly. "Then enjoy the pause." Agatha leaned back, stretching slightly, allowing herself a moment of introspection. Her pride, bruised yet resilient, balanced against the faint ache of vulnerability. Hodge purred louder, reminding her of the warmth that existed regardless of the village's petty intrigues. A knock at the door announced Doris Simpson, who arrived with her usual cheer, clasping a small tin of biscuits. "Thought you might need sustenance after all the excitement," she said, placing the tin on the table with a clatter. Agatha smiled wryly. Sustenance and moral support, two essentials in Castley. The afternoon drifted on with calm conversation, laughter at Charles's dry jokes, and Hodge's occasional flick of tail in judgmental commentary. Agatha allowed herself a measure of contentment, aware that she had survived not just blackmail, but the tangled web of village secrecy and human folly. Then, as she prepared to rise, a subtle flutter caught her attention. An envelope slipped under the letterbox, landing quietly on the doormat. She picked it up, noting the familiar handwriting. "Castley never forgets," she read aloud, voice carrying mild amusement. Mrs. Blocksby raised an eyebrow. "Ah, a village reminder that memory lingers longer than one might wish." Agatha chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Indeed. And yet, somehow, I almost admire it." She tucked the note into her coat pocket, alongside the previous trivial envelope. Even petty threats held a curious charm when one had already survived them. She sank back into her armchair, Hodge curling fully into her lap, tail flicking in rhythmic satisfaction. "Perhaps a trip to London is in order," she muttered, fingers stroking the cat's fur, "to escape the gossip, if only briefly." Mrs. Blocksby sipped her tea, serene. "Gossip may wait, Agatha, but time always moves forward. You'll return, and life in Castley will resume as usual." Agatha glanced toward the window, observing the quiet lanes, the familiar cottages, the distant spire of the vicarage. Castley remained unchanged in its appearance, yet forever altered by recent events, the exposure of secrets, the chase, the confessions, and the resolution of Mrs. Boggle's misdeeds. She took a slow breath, feeling the duality of satisfaction and lingering vulnerability. Blackmail survived, she had endured, yet the faintest twinge of mortification remained. It was part of life in a village where memory outlasted discretion. Hodge stretched luxuriously, the low purr vibrating in her lap, a domestic counterpoint to the village's undying curiosity. The kettle sighed on the stove, steam curling in lazy spirals, completing the tableau of home, warmth, and understated triumph. Agatha exhaled, allowing herself a small, private smile. She would face Castley again tomorrow, envelope in hand, dignity intact, Hodge's approval secured, and the faint sting of embarrassment softened by the quiet peace of domesticity. The village, as always, watched and whispered, but tonight at least the secrets were hers, and she had survived them all.